The second article is called Floortime All the Time, kind of the key to a comprehensive social emotional program. One of the reasons I wrote this is because we were getting a lot of families who think that floor time is just an intervention to help their child learn to play or learn to socialize. And really, what it is a social emotional intervention that through play, facilitates growth of communication, adaptability, building relationships, empathy, integrity, self-confidence, thinking skills, logic, etc. And so the question then is, how do we build a program around these concepts? What does that kind of have to look like? So the first step is finding these dynamic therapists, like in the first article. But the second step is thinking about, okay, where is my child spending time? What kind of things are they doing on a daily basis where I can build this in, right? As opposed to say, okay, my child's going to floor time. It's a couple hours a week. That's it. And then they go home. And it's one thing when we're busy, we can't be paying attention all the time. But what if they're at home and they have an older sibling? What if they're at home and they have a nanny? What if there's a grandparent? What if they're going to a co-op, preschool that's only two other kids, right? Can we get some of this built in there? And if we're not asking those questions, it's definitely not going to happen. But if we ask those questions, maybe it can. So what are your all thoughts or questions about that article, or what kind of things stood out?
Can I, or yes.
It says, I'm an IEE provider to have evals, and as a result, floor time oriented goals developed. So, within the school system, the goals have to be academically driven. And this is a challenge we ran into because I started a charter school many years ago in DC with a parent actually who I worked with, whose son I worked with, who's now about to go to American University. But he was at 2.5, a kid who was mostly echolalic with his language, couldn't open a book without having to flip through all the pages, extremely rigid, would have meltdowns. I mean, a lot of the stuff, the behavioral challenges and limited communication and engagement. And he's a warm, connected, chatty teenager now. Now he still has some difficulties. But like I said, he's going to AU next year and he'll need some support, but he'll do great. He just graduated high school at a very competitive DC school. And so, when we created the charter school and he went there, we focused on creating a social emotional curriculum that was kind of the foundation of the academic curriculum, right? So everything we were doing in the early childhood classrooms, especially, was based on interaction, communication, adaptability, thinking, collaborative activities with the students, play, all the things that we talk about in these discussions. When it came to writing the IEPs, we did have to modify some of how the goals were being written. But at the end of the day, the process continued to get pushed back towards the typical goals and writings because the teachers, the therapists, there was so much pressure being put on how to format these things so that they were still academic access driven, because that's what schools necessitate. And that's why any school that tells you they're working or prioritizing your child's social emotional health and growth is fundamentally lying to you. And it's not because they are trying to lie to you and be disingenuous. They probably believe what they're saying, but they cannot prioritize your social emotional health because they have to prioritize academic access. Now, if they were smart, they'd know that academic success is built on social emotional health. But school systems are very linear. Right. So it's really challenging to try to squeeze it in that way. And we've tried so many times, it's just never worked. So it's going to be an uphill battle that you'll end up fighting. And you can do it. You can change some of the goals. You get some stuff written in, but now who's going to do it? Right. Who's going to provide it? We unfortunately can't be sending people out to different places just because we don't have the staff and the flexibility for that. And the people who do those things, like there's a group out there now that was started by a executive from one of the healthcare companies called Positive Development that's claiming they're doing a DIR type therapy and going into the schools. they created their own training program, and they put my dad's a little animated picture of my dad on there saying, Dr. Greenspan and Serena created Floortime. And there's nothing Floortime based about, from our perspective at least, about what they're doing, right? But they're the people out there going to the schools saying they're doing Floortime instead of ABA. So unfortunately, that's kind of what's available. Yeah, it's not an easy situation, believe me. I mean, I thought when we started the charter school that we would have kind of this proof of concept, and we did at first. For the first 5 to 6 years, we had this amazing proof of concept that we could build a school around a social emotional curriculum, as opposed to trying to integrate a social emotional curriculum into an academic setting. And we did it, and the kids were doing phenomenally, but it was really hard to maintain, because unfortunately, the people you get working at these places weren't all as dynamic as that first article might suggest they need to be. And so you get a couple great teachers and a couple really challenging ones who didn't want to do it. They got into teaching because they wanted to stand in front of a classroom and lecture, or tell kids what to do, or have them sit there quietly with their hands in their laps. And we know that's not the right educational model for anybody, but that's what the US education system breeds. Unfortunately, I don't have that full curriculum. It was kind of it was a work in progress. I'm actually putting something together now that will kind of be a little bit more structured along those lines, for kind of a sample curriculum. But what I would tell you is that the curriculum was the milestones. You know, instead of working on academic access goals of sitting at circle time and compliance and raising our hand and, following instructions, our curriculum were the milestones. Is this child engaging? Are they interacting? Are they communicating? Are they adapting? You mean all the things? Are they problem solving? And we're doing that in the classroom, in play-based and, creative moments. And we actually called them creative moments when we'd have breakout sessions with kids, not floor time sessions. It was awesome. So yeah. So the other thing that I'm adding to that now is that in a classroom of kids who are capable of this, is to make sure that you have as many collaborative activities as possible, right? When you think about what's going to really breed social emotional health in a classroom of young children, it's the collaboration of the activities, where they're working together on something, instead of working independently or all at different centers and you have one kid here and one kid there. Get them to work together and create an activity where they have to work together, right? They have to collaborate. And that actually will yield these social emotional outcomes. And even if one child's further behind socially, well, then the other kids pull them up because now they need their help in order to accomplish their goal. Yes.
Yeah, I think you could really write that facilitating peer interaction article that you mentioned once.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you. And Aya, you raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you. I was just thinking now if it was possible to make maybe some kind of training for those sneaky parents who are gonna incorporate developmental goals into very educational goals together, kind of really think how to put the schools on board and how to really marry these very different approaches. So there's something that is more holistic for our kids.
Yes.
Probably everyone internationally could benefit just from the ideas, at least, because we can't create something. Maybe we don't have to create something from a scratch.
I have a lot of stuff along these lines. I
Oh, I
happy to
want that
share with you. And I'm happy to share it with you, and you can look through it.
Yes.
It's not exactly a curriculum. It's a lot of different pieces of information. It's stuff that I kind of aggregated when we were running the school and putting stuff together for the school. And so I'm happy to share it with all of you, because I think a lot of it is just it's kind of a thought process that we have to kind of figure out how to use this stuff. I mean, my father wrote an article years ago. It's a great article, and it's all about I will find it right now, and I'll just share it in the chat right now while you're here, the article.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. But basically, I mean, all of this stuff centers around the same ideas, right? That we're really helping these kids be engaged while interactively learning, not passively learning, right? We want them to be an active participant. Readiness. There we go. Okay. I think this is it, guys. Let me just double check. No, that's not it. There it is. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna share the link with you all. Feel free to download it. And here we go. So this is actually from my father. And let's see. Oh shoot, sorry everybody. See, how do did you see we group chat? Okay, here we go. There you go, everybody. So that article is a really good overview of kind of how we're going to be integrating social emotional goals into an academic curriculum. Now it talks about some of the higher level stuff. The earlier stuff is really just the milestones and making sure that children are moving through the milestones, because if a child hasn't mastered, engagement, interaction, reciprocity, problem solving, the use of symbolic communication and logic, academics are actually somewhat irrelevant, because it's pointless for me to learn how to read if I don't have symbol recognition yet, right? I can maybe sight read a few words, but I'm not going to understand each letter and be able to sound things out and understand phonemes and phonemes and actually being able to read and understand then what that word means, right? From a conceptual standpoint. So now I can read the word, but do I really understand what it means? And that's why you see a lot of kids who are hyperlexic with autism, and they have 4th grade reading skills, but they have below age conceptualization skills of that reading, right? They don't understand what they're reading. And so the goal of this is to make sure you have those first 6 milestones in place before we get into an academic environment. And that means that we often are holding kids back. There's a whole article about kind of when we're putting kids in school and holding kids back, and it's better for all kids because you actually have more time to, 1, develop your executive functioning, but 2, all of these milestones. What was the other part of it? But I mean, those are kind of the main pieces. Yeah, so Sylvia.
I'm so sorry. I don't know how to digitally raise a hand. I haven't learned it yet.
I see you.
So I wanted to ask, because this practical question came to my mind while I was reading the article, that you're saying that this is an integrating, like it's so important that across all settings, everyone is behaving the same way and sort of interacting with the child, the same principles.
Right,
and I think we all know the Floortime principles. I think it's because it's written down in so many places. People can sort of learn and understand that social emotional development is over everything, and playfully engaging, all that. But when it comes to, because you also mentioned that it is important how developmentally delayed the children are, and how many goals they have. So the goals, not the principles, the goals. Like that made me wonder, like, who is going to be the one who evaluates and sets those goals?
Sure.
And then who's going to be the authority who sort of, not authority really, but the person responsible to synchronize that team of OT, speech therapists, teachers?
Right.
Does a parent have the
Well, sometimes in the
capacity?
past, it has been a lot of parents who have had to do that. And, when we first started working, I remember when I first started working, with my father, being trained by him and running the Floortime Center, which is separate from him. He never had anything to do with the centers. He just trained Tim Bleeker and myself. We were helping parents understand where their child was, but they were essentially the main advocate for their child, right? They were the ones who then would take this information and bring it to the schools and say, go to the IEP meetings and say, no, this goal is not going to be written that way. It's not going to be, 10 out of 10 trials. It's going to be, we're aiming for 20 circles of interaction, right? And so they pushed. And so unfortunately, that does have to be the situation. These days, Tim and I are certainly, for families we're working with at the office, we end up doing a little bit more of that. But if it's at a school that really doesn't have the ability or interest to implement this stuff. I mean, I've talked to so many schools who love the sound of this, but they're unwilling to make a single change internally. I mean, not a single one. I mean, schools and teachers are notorious for being rigid, right? And so, yeah.
I can tell you one thing. I'm not in America, okay?
Yeah.
So I'm already at a disadvantage. Most people don't even know what floor time is.
Right.
So there's another thing. Homeschooling is forbidden. It's illegal.
Okay.
So you have to send your child to school. And of course, you're trying to, like, we can actually get around this by having a floor time trained aide, shadow teacher, something like that. Maybe, I'm guessing. It's not important.
And that's what we recommend a lot, actually, is getting the school to allow you to bring in a paraprofessional, a shadow, or an aide, and then having us or doing online training for that person, so they really are the one implementing it during the day, overseeing this. And then you have either yourself or a lead therapist who's overseeing that person, right? That's kind of the hierarchy that we've kind of used in the past. And as you're saying, it's not ideal, but it's something. And it actually is better than in some cases, because in the US, as much as there may be more options, the rigidity of having that person in the classroom almost is less an option. I mean, we've had so many schools turn away these therapists or these paraprofessionals who we've encouraged the families to bring in, and the families are even willing to pay for it themselves, and the school system says no. Yeah,
I heard there were parents who were willing to go themselves, and they were told no also.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it gets down to this fundamental perception that the schools know what's best. They're going to do what they're going to do, and you just and that's the kind of the attitude here in the U.S. Unfortunately, the U.S. is falling further and further behind the rest of the world in education, which is the sad part. Yet we still have this ego that we know the best educationally. And unfortunately, parents usually are not the ones who they allow in the classroom. But even if I've had schools who reject a paraprofessional who's not a parent of the child, it's kind of a trained shadow or an aide, unless they've sued the school system to allow them to have that person in the room with them. And at that point, sometimes even the school system has to pay for it.
It's really sad.
It
But,
is.
you know,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking here, for example, a parent would probably not be able to have this role to synchronize, because I'm thinking every single therapist, doctor, psychiatrist, whatever, they all think that they already know. And they don't care about that much about what the other professional is saying even. So for me to
I'll
be
tell
able
you what
to,
I tell some parents, and I'm going to ask anybody who's a therapist in the US to cover your ears. I tell parents not to work with therapists. I literally tell them you're better off not working with a therapist who's unwilling to adapt to the child's needs and take a more child-centered approach, right? It's just, you don't need speech, you don't need OT, you don't need PT. Oh, I mean, most kids don't need PT at all unless they have like cerebral palsy or some neuromuscular disorder. But these are the things that are recommended by the doctor, right? So parents want to follow that recommendation. And I understand that. And breaking that recommendation is anxiety provoking, because now you're going against this person you trust, right? So I understand all of that. But the reality is, if that therapist can't connect with your child, at a minimum, can't connect with your child as well as you can over time, they're not worth working with. That was my father's rule, not mine. And so he would tell parents that all the time. And so what would happen is, I mean, I can show you videos of kids. We actually, when we first started working, we didn't have a lot of speech and OT therapists at our office. We only had a couple, and sometimes we didn't have any speech because we only had like one who was really good, and we weren't willing to hire ones who were not good. And so we would actually tell some families not to do speech therapy. And that was like a big no-no. Oh, we have kids who are fully conversational age appropriate levels now who didn't do speech therapy, even though they came in nonverbal. Well, how is that possible if you didn't do speech? Well, it's possible because it happened, because we worked on their communication, not their language. But we broke the norm by doing that.
And you know, now that I'm reading also the Child with Special Needs and Learning Tree, this article is pointing out how important it is to work on the developmental milestones first. And you know, like how every parent usually, like the first thing you spot is your child, for example, lost language. So you have to work on language. So you go for words, but then you don't realize how many prerequisites there might be that are missing and shaky. So now I know, my kid is probably not regulated most of the time. So sensory issues, that comes also from probably auditory processing issues, which I didn't even think about before. And there are now games in the book that tell me what kind of games I can play to enhance that. And then maybe, we will.
Exactly. And it's tough. I mean, unfortunately, what my father realized when he started this whole thing in the 70s and 80s is that the reason he wanted to put so much this in books that were accessible to families and parents is because he knew the people in the community he was working with already, and that the parents were going to have to become the experts. And it's scary because it's just something that you shouldn't have to take as much responsibility for, but you are if you want to have something that's really effective. And we've seen this in every country we've gone to, certainly, but it's it's kind of a norm at this point, where you have so many different viewpoints, so many different egos, so many different perceptions of what's going on with this child and what to do next. And there's still no agreement in the US on this stuff, or in many other countries. And I will say, I mean, it's not necessarily a better or a worse scenario in my mind, because in other countries there's a vacuum, right? There's few services, if any. In the US, there's too many. Parents are pulled between 50 different options and they don't know what to believe, so they try it all, or they go in the direction of the, kind of the most available, or the one that's around the corner, and that's rarely the right one. So it's either too many or not enough. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a consensus yet as to what the ideal situation is for these kids and really what's happening inside. And it's because we still have these very polarized views of, more of a psychodynamic understanding of child development, which is we look at the whole child and the history and where they're coming from and all the factors that go into child development and mental health, or we look at it from a cognitive behavioral theory, right? Which says that, well, we are a byproduct of our environment in a way, but we really can't change any of those things. So all we can do is change our behavior.
Yeah.
And so it's tricky. I mean, you're unfortunately, you're now knowing what I've been pushing up against for the last 20 years doing this stuff. And sorry, you were asking a question. So about this, who's the person to make a holistic approach? Parents. Well, it depends who you're working with. A lot of times the parents are the ones who are going to have to kind of oversee that holistic approach, because you're putting together your team of therapists. That was literally why we created the Floortime Center, because we saw when we first started, we saw that we were just doing floor time to train parents and offer floor time. Like, we were those non-licensed therapists doing floor time, right? We were licensed in floor time, but we weren't licensed OT or speech. I was an educator by trade, and Tim had a background in mental health, but kind of was working in floor time as well. And so we saw that these kids were going to speech, they're going to OT, they're going to all these different places, and this whole kind of mix of therapies was not working for a lot of our kids. And so they're benefiting from what we were doing, but then therapists report that they're doing the opposite things in other places. So then we hired our first OT, Jessica. We still remember her. She was great for us, and she really helped us understand how OT was going to fit with floor time in our program. And then we saw that we had to become this holistic center ourselves, right? That if we were going to do this right, we were going to have speech and OT educators, all these different pieces on site that kids really needed. And that's kind of how we have developed into what we are, not because it was the easiest, not because it was the best business decision, because it's not. It's just fundamentally not. And so, but it's the best for the kids. And so now we have like these intensive programs that we created in addition to having the holistic program itself of the therapies, because we realize that even if a kid comes to us once a week for OT, once a week for speech, once a week for floor time, once a week for floor time coaching for the parents, it's not enough, because now they're still going to school or other places the rest of that week where they're getting exposed to other things. So it needs to be done intensively too. Yeah, it's not easy. And I apologize for getting you all sucked into this and believing in it and telling you now how hard it is. But it is. Do those therapists graduate imagine they're trained with you? So I'll be honest, we're going through a process right now, a rebuilding process with therapists. We did a lot of training when we first started, but unfortunately we really didn't have the foresight to understand some of the challenges we were going to run into with training people in other countries and abroad and keeping them up with maintaining their skill set. Because just as you all have seen with your own therapists, is that, you know, in order, it just, you've seen your own education, in order to do this well, you have to constantly maintain a thought process about it. It's not a one and done training. And you know, I mean, I was just at a school here in DC a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to the administration and the teachers, and I was actually with a mom whose son graduated from our program, is at the school now and doing great. And the school wanted to know about how he got so far. And so I went in with the mom, who's also a neurodivergent individual herself and does interior design and is just this amazing designer, has this amazing perception, and she knows all about the nervous system and the sensory processing and how visual design affects us in space. And it's fascinating. I loved her lecture. But when I was talking about it, and the head of the school asked me questions at the end of our program and our training and how to get teacher stuff, and she said, so you know, how long did it take? Is this like a 1 weekend type thing? And I was like, no, this is not a 1 week. I said, 1 weekend is where it starts. You know, this is an ongoing process. This is an entire curriculum. This isn't a step one, step two, but that's the perception, right? And so because I said, no, this is an ongoing process that requires maintenance and upkeep and everything else, she was discouraged. She wants this cookie cutter out of the box thing that doesn't really help the kids, but is something that the school can easily implement. Right? That's,
you know, lately, if it doesn't fit on TikTok,
exactly.
it doesn't.
No, exactly. So I mean, we're pushing against multiple systems that are built against working on these kind of fundamentals, everybody. And we are seeing progress. I will say we've seen progress. Things are not where they were 20 years ago when Tim and I started the Floortime Center. I started learning about this, but they're still behind where they need to be. And the key, I mean, just the fact that you all are here listening to this, that I can share these articles with you, that we can, I mean, literally the charter school I mentioned started because of stuff like this. You know, the mom was already working with me, and she had worked with my father, and she went to one of his lectures because she had a PhD in education, studied the integrated classroom model. And she went to one of my father's final lectures. Sorry. And he gave the community a challenge. He said, you have to do something with this now. And she took that and she did something with it with me. And that's what we have to do. You know, it's the only way this stuff gets done. And even if it happens like the school where it was great for 5-6 years and then it fails because someone else takes it over, it's okay. We now know it works, right? I know that worked. And so we can replicate that, and we can even make it better because we know what the issues are. So we just have to keep trying. And that's all I can say to that. But everybody, on that note, I think we'll wrap things up today. And I wanted to thank you all so much for this. You know, I'm really happy that you all came to listen, to talk with me about this stuff and in the articles. And I really hope we can all stay in touch. And please feel free to email me with additional questions or requests for support. You know, I'll keep putting stuff out there for you all to benefit from, and you just keep letting me know what helps. Okay.
I just also wanted to say thank you so much for everything. And just so you know, the books, these sessions and everything, in a place where you can't really find this kind of intellectual stimulation, it was like a shining beacon for me. And seriously, I'm hanging in there. Whenever I'm down and I feel like I can't do this anymore, I can't live like this, I read one of the articles or I read a book chapter, and I seriously feel like, okay, I can do it. I you know, my son deserves it, and I know now how. And it feels like coming home every time I read the books or I read the articles, and whenever I listen to you, honestly. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I can tell you, I went through the same process, not from a personal working my own child, but I had to go through the same growth experience and a lot of frustration, a lot of feelings of giving up at times, because it's challenging to do something new and different, and especially when things are pushing against you, and it's not you just trying to do something, you know, it's that you're actually being prevented from sometimes doing it, you know. So it's admirable that you're pushing back so hard. So thank you for keep going, and please let me know what I can do to help. I really do want to keep helping.
I'm going to bother you for sure. I'm gonna.
Good. I'll regret that, huh?
You'll see.
All right, everybody. Well, enjoy the new article I just sent you tonight. If you do want more stuff, and Aya and anybody who else, I'll just share this with this group. I'll share the resources I have about kind of the school readiness, early education stuff that I was putting into development, that I developed from the school. I'll just send you the stuff that I've written up about it so you can look at it and see if there's stuff that you all can do with it. And I'm happy to think of other things too. So everyone have a great evening or morning or day, and I'll let you all know when we're going to do this again. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.